Well, there's no escaping it now. We are definitely getting the second season for Amazon's The Rings of Power by the end of this month, and, well, I am looking forward to yet another train wreck, despite a really excellent trailer that came out of Comic-Con. Yes, let's admit it, this was a fantastic trailer, but if you have seen any bit of the first season for The Rings of Power, and if you know anything about Tolkien's lore for Middle-earth, you know that what you see here on the screen is nothing more than a beautiful lie. And I'm gonna talk about it in today's Writer's Rant. Hi there everyone, Lars here from Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast for novice writers by novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers. Because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And the last season of The Rings of Power just provided us with so many fantastic lessons of what you should not do with your stories that I'm looking forward to seeing what Season 2 rolls out. Because, yeah, this is going to be a dumpster fire. Hopefully a beautiful dumpster fire, but a dumpster fire nonetheless. And yet, at the same time, maybe, just maybe, there's a 0.001% chance that J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay might actually shift gears and take us to where we ought to be within the actual Lord of the Rings canon. Then again, this is a 0.001% chance because everything that I've seen thus far is very clearly telegraphing that we are going anywhere but. So let's already tackle this trailer from a lore perspective, from the canon. And the reason why we need to first talk about the canon aspect of things is because any good writer, whether you are a fanfiction writer, the writer of your own story, or someone who has been appointed to continue a property after the original creator has passed on or been unable to complete their work, you need to understand the lore, the world building, and the characters. Because if you don't understand the proper sequence of events, where characters have been and where characters are supposed to go, and everything that ties into that, how the world works and all of it, if you get that wrong, your story quickly begins to unravel, especially to the people who've been paying attention. But you yourself will begin losing your place and start deviating into all of these weird little spin-offs that don't actually contribute to the overall story, and in fact begin tearing it apart. If you don't know the canon to your own story, you begin to contradict yourself. There will be inconsistencies. All sense of cohesion and chronological order go out the window, and any semblance of coherency within the story itself, that it at least understands where it's going, just dies. That is why you must respect the canon of any story. It's not because, no, Tolkien did it the best. He did do it the best, but just for the sake of making a good story. If you do not respect the canon, your story will inevitably fall apart because it will lose its identity. It will lose its sense of direction. It will lose everything that made it wonderful. So, with that quick diatribe out of the way, let's talk about some of the blatant canon violations that we see within this trailer. Let's start off with the one that I love seeing this. I love seeing the Balrog flying out and attacking the dwarves. I want to see the fall of Moria because it is an epic moment within the history of Middle-earth that is largely unseen. We just know it happened from the few dwarves who managed to survive. Now then, here's the problem with this. So the dwarves allied themselves with Celebrimbor and with his people. They were very closely aligned, very good friends, and with lots of trade and trading of secrets between each other. They worked very closely together, and the dwarves closed their doors only after Celebrimbor is killed by Sauron. And then, after many years of them having sealed up the doors of Moria, so that way Sauron couldn't get to them, only then, when they delve too greedily and too deep, does the Balrog wake up, get unleashed, and then attack the dwarves. Everything is happening really, really fast in this season, where we have Celebrimbor getting killed, Moria being shut, and the Balrog destroying the dwarves. This is meant to be a very epic saga, and when you're cramming all of this into just one season, to be very frank, this is going way too fast, and a lot of the emotional depth and the emotional stakes for all of these characters has been absolutely thrown out the window. The moment I saw the Balrog show up, I was like, that's beautiful, and that's wrong. It should not be happening at this time. The next big canon violation is Sauron himself. This stupid introduction of a human called Halbrand, who was really Sauron just masquerading as a mere mortal in order to escape the ravages of the wars that he had started to try to start a new life until Galadriel's hunt for revenge brought him back, and then through a forced romance, really a one-sided romance because Galadriel only loves her sword, and Sauron decided to become evil again. This is just stupid. It was a stupid thing to do, and it becomes even dumber when the elves know, Celebrimbor knows that Sauron is on the loose and that Sauron helped him to develop these rings. He knows! And so, when Halbrand, wearing a wig, shows up in a big ball of fire to wow Celebrimbor, not only does he look exactly like Halbrand, but wearing a wig and some little pointy things at the top of his ears, Celebrimbor is an idiot because he should know that someone is going to try to sway him to complete making the rings. He should be questioning Anatar, the bringer of gifts. But no, he's not. And so he's like, oh wow, I really want to make more rings. This sounds fantastic. Hey, shady dude who just showed up in a ball of fire, why don't you help me make these rings? This is so dumb. Sauron showed up as Anatar during a time of peace and taught Celebrimbor and the other elves how to make the rings. Celebrimbor himself was already working on making magical gems, one of the greatest of which was the Elessar, which he gifted to Galadriel in order to heal the wounds upon Middle-earth that had been inflicted by Sauron and the other servants of Morgoth. And so Celebrimbor, already a very intelligent elf, and a very good elf, ambitious, yes, and his ambition and hubris does lead him to accepting help from Sauron, but in all honesty, many of the elves were deceived, Galadriel being one of the few who wasn't deceived by Sauron's beautiful mask. Well, Sauron then is able to work on all of these other rings with Celebrimbor and bind them to the ring which he then forges at Mount Doom, the One Ring. However, the 3 rings were made solely by the hands of Celebrimbor, thus removing the taint of Sauron's touch in any way, which Sauron helped with making the rings back in the first season, which already goes against the canon. The reason why the 3 rings of the elves are bound to the ring from Sauron is because they were made using the designs and the techniques pioneered by Sauron and bound to the will of the One Ring. However, the 3 elven rings are very clearly independent of the One Ring. They are able to act on their own according to the desires and wills of their owners. No, they do not show Galadriel any sort of visions. Those are a product of her own powerful magic and foresight. No, the rings are there to amplify the power of the elves, not to save them from some weird darkness. No, it is to amplify the power of the elves in order for them to preserve the beauty of Middle-earth and of their own elven cultures. J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay could have easily have understood this if they had read the books. Go back to the book, go back to the book, go back to the book. Yeah, screw you two. You obviously didn't. And you are continuing on with your ridiculousness here with the rings with, you have now become collaborators with Sauron. No, they haven't. The 3 rings are in defiance of Sauron. That is even explained in the Fellowship of the Ring. You stupid showrunners. Then let's go with some other really quick canon violations. Tom Bombadil should not be here. He should be happily married, kicking back in the old forest, singing a bunch of little songs, and completely unconcerned with the events of Middle-earth. Done. End of story. That is who Tom Bombadil is! And he's always only been that way. So, screw you, Season 2. Also, Gandalf came over with the other wizards. He did not fall down from some weird comet. He was sent over on the ships from the Grey Havens. Sent on over to the Grey Havens. He met with Círdan, and there he was gifted one of the 3 elven rings by Círdan the Shipwright, who realized that he was the greatest of the 5 and would have need of the ring's power in order to withstand all of Sauron's evil machinations. So again, a massive canon violation. Also, hobbits were not in the Second Age. Neither were their progenitors. They are a product of the Third Age. So still, we have all of these canon violations right here. And Isildur was an awesome dude. No, he was not just hanging out somewhere to stumble around in Mirkwood and face off against a bunch of spiders. No, he does not face off against the spawn of Ungoliant. This is yet dumb. And then we have Adar, who is still hanging around. This guy should have been wiped out along with all of his other little flimsy orcs. That way Sauron could come swoop on in and just bring all the orcs on over to his side. We are bandying about way too much with a little silly side story that will ultimately just be the orcs come and serve Sauron, as they always would have. This is a waste of time from the real drama, which should be the forging of the rings and giving these rings to the different kingdoms, not just the dwarves of Moria, but to the kingdoms of men who are very well established at this time and are rubbing shoulders in the best and worst of ways with the Númenóreans, who at this time are settling and colonizing the coasts of Middle-earth. All of this is just, what the heck? And then, what actually is happening on over here with the Númenóreans? Who knows? Whatever they're going to do is, again, going to be another canon violation. For one thing, the Eagles would never have come to pay homage to or even assist Ar-Pharazôn because the guy was evil. And the Eagles serve good. You can't easily trick the Eagles. That's one of the things, is that Saruman was one of the few people with his amazing powers and ability of speech and persuasion who was able to, even in a small way, trick the Eagles. And the Eagles figured it out really fast that they were being duped and helped to save Gandalf and whisk him away from Orthanc. And from that point onwards, they definitely were not going to serve the purposes of evil. And again, within the Second Age, the Eagles would only really be going anywhere at the command of Manwë. And he did not have any interactions with Ar-Pharazôn. And this is to say nothing of the continuing travesty of Galadriel continuing to be an insufferable girl boss who could kill an ice troll within a few seconds. Because this is, again, not who Galadriel ever was. And it already is clear to me that they are not going to course correct, because Galadriel, after her great defeat, quote unquote, that she should have been dealt at the end of Season 1, has learned nothing. And she's going to continue thinking that she's all right, and that her ring is speaking to her, and that of course she's going to be the one to be able to defeat Sauron, and all of this nonsense. And so there's going to be no course correction where it comes to Galadriel. Galadriel will not be humbled. Galadriel will not learn from the mistakes of her past. Galadriel is not going to become the beautiful elven queen that we know her to be within this season. And I highly doubt that this season is going to set her up for that anyway, because these writers are too scared of making a strong female character actually have to work for the person that she needs to become. They've robbed her of a character arc. But to save my vocals at least a bit, let's dial it down a little bit and talk about what might be good for this particular season. Again, when I review and analyze each episode when they come out, I will be approaching this show from the perspective of both the lore and as if it were its own original series. So, if we think of this as its own original series, what can it actually do to really bring some much-needed life to the story and get away from the melodramatic soap opera nonsense that was really plaguing the first season, and step away from just a lot of the horrible character flaws and world building nonsense that was going on. For one thing, getting away from the Harfoots is actually a good move. It is a good move. And to have not Gandalf, who really is Gandalf, wandering around with Nori, or whatever her bucket is, within the lands of Rune or somewhere else, you know what? This is a chance to go and explore a little bit more of Middle-earth that could be interesting to see. And maybe we'll get some neat little moments of conversation, some neat encounters along the way. However, if the trailer is anything to go by, it seems as though we're going to be running into yet more girl bosses and yet another run-in with this odd female cult of ring wraiths, pseudo ring wraith things that really didn't make any sense back in the first season. So that's going to be a little bit of a problem right there, returning to something that really wasn't all that good. But if we get an explanation for what's going on here, and the explanation is good and ties into some decent world building and leads to a good character arc for not Gandalf and Nori, then I think we'll actually get a fair little subplot that's being spun off on the side of the story. Again, Tom Bombadil should not be there, but there is the chance that they might do something interesting with him that, even though it completely breaks canon, maybe from the perspective of a completely original story, he will actually add in some much needed spice and perspective and good character development for the team that will at least make this an enjoyable part of the show. I am also happy to see that it looks as though the queen has been healed from whatever happened to her eyes. Remember, she got the embers into her mouth, not into her eyes. So her no longer being blind, that should make a whole lot of sense. Again, consistency is a problem for this series, though ultimately I think that the real winner for inconsistencies was the Acolyte, but we're going to move on from that travesty and just focus on this abomination for right now. Seeing that the queen is healed, or at least I hope that that's what we're seeing here, and that we're going to come back to Numenor and see the events unfolding within Numenor, hopefully this means that we're going to get some actually good politicking within the Numenorian court, and we get to see Ar-Pharazôn actually being the guy who he was in the books, and being a very suave politician who manages to wrangle control away from the crown and basically crowns himself as the new ruler of Numenor, even though it is not really his to be had. And yes, that will mean an illegal wedding, though I again doubt that the writers are going to have the guts to do something like that. But if they're not going to do the wedding, then at the very least they can do some suave politicking and at least show us something really interesting from Numenor itself. That could be really good. Another thing that I do like to see, because I love action set pieces, I love writing action, is that we're going to get some big battles. It looks as though Elrond is going to be sent as the herald of King Gil-galad down to the south to face off against the armies of Adar outside of Mordor. That could be really interesting to see, and if it's done well, it will look really cool and it will make sense. As strange as it is, despite as much as I rag on this awful show, I have hope that they can at least do something interesting here. If they don't, I will be there to absolutely tear them apart for botching what could be an excellent action set piece of Elrond versus Adar, and probably ultimately against Sauron, which again would just be really cool to see. That would be some excellent development, and it would give Elrond a chance to actually shine, show that he's not just a politician, but that he's also a warrior, because that's who Elrond is supposed to be. Elrond is this fantastic amalgamation of healer, of scientist, of architect, of warrior, of a politician, and even in a way as a religious leader. Elrond is everything you want in a good king. And so we need to see Elrond displaying all of his good qualities throughout the story. Because we get to see the Balrog destroying Moria, I really don't have much hope for the dwarves as far as them contributing really anyway substantially to this season. I might be surprised because Disa was a surprise to a lot of people watching this, that she was a fairly fun character, and it'd be nice to see more of that. And I think that there can be some really great interactions between the two Durins. The only thing is, again, because we know, thanks to the trailer giving this stuff away, that the end is nigh, I feel like we're really rushing what could be some fantastic tension, some building up of the emotional stakes, of the world building stakes, of really ultimately what is at stake with the Rings of Power, seeing how they can yield amazing beauty and power and longevity to the ones who wield it, but also that it brings curses and destruction to them, because ultimately these are devices meant to bind all the people of Middle-earth under the rule of Sauron. So again, unfortunately, I feel like we're really not going to get everything that we could get out of the dwarves. What I would like to see is, I would really like to see more of the family dynamic. I would love to see how it's strong and how it breaks down because they invite evil on in, and make that the core of what's really happening to Moria. Again, because things are going to be sped up, I don't think we're going to have enough time to really enjoy the family dynamic, and then watching it unfortunately fall apart, which it's kind of sad to say that that would be enjoyable, but again, it is a part of the emotional stakes. It's a part of the downfall of one of the greatest kingdoms of Middle-earth, and it would showcase in a very powerful, poignant way, if given enough time for this storyline to really brew, to show the corrosive, corrupting power of all the rings besides the 3 elven rings, since those ones were the ones that were made without Sauron's direct touch. But those are kind of the things that I would like to see, that I would like to actually see. Those are the things that I could be somewhat hopeful for going into the newest season. Ultimately, I feel like it's just going to be another mess. Now, as I've said before, and I'm going to reiterate it again, when I start breaking down each and every episode of this season, I am going to view each episode, number one, from the point of view of the lore. How well does it hold up? And then number two, how does it work as its own original story? And by tackling the show from these two perspectives, we can see just how well J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay have done. Have they learned from their experiences with their first major project? Let's consider that The Rings of Power really is just their very first published book. From the perspective of a novice author looking at 2 other novice authors who have been blessed with this amazing opportunity to make this show and have unfortunately bungled it, I understand. The first book is hard. When I look at Knights of Halicruz, my very first novel, it is a bit of a messy novel. There are mistakes in it. There are definitely problems. That comes from a first book. And you know what? Usually I would be more than willing to be very gracious, because I want people to treat my own works with some grace, especially the earlier ones. But you need to see progress. You need to see people taking critique, criticism, and applying it to their works in order to improve their story going forwards. The big question here is if J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay have improved the story from Season 1 to Season 2. If we don't see any significant development, that is a huge indictment against these writers, that they don't know what they're doing, that they're falling apart, and that this show is truly a billion-dollar-plus disaster. A disaster that plagued not just New Zealand, but is now plaguing the UK, along with all these Tolkien fans across the world, as it spits on the legacy of Tolkien. No, we want to actually see them improve. At the very least, show us that you are capable of growing as writers. Because if they can't, then the sad thing is that this guy right here, Lars on the internet from Camille's Harem, a novice author, has done more than they have in order to improve his own craft. Should this season be a failure? If it's a failure, that means that this novice author right here has done an objectively better job with his own flagship series. And that's very disappointing to think of, where I'm just a guy working on his own small budget versus the ridiculous billion-dollar-plus budget and resources of Amazon across multiple studios, with guys blessed and ordained by J.J. Abrams in Hollywood. So we're just gonna have to see what happens. If I am wrong, I'll be more than happy to eat my words. In fact, if I'm wrong and I have to eat my words, I will have a very special video right there for everyone where I will eat my words very literally. But if not, if I end up actually being right in the end in my doubts and assessments, then what that means is, well, that means that you should then buy one of my books and not deal with any of this awful stuff. In fact, if you actually wanted to compare the Rings of Power to my own flagship series, which I just said, the first book is rough. It gets better as the series goes along. If you wish to actually put my words against their words, against the words of J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, then I challenge you to buy my book, Knights of Halicruise, and check out my series, The Legend of the Ten Lords. How do I, a novice author, hold up against J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay with their billion-dollar-plus production of The Rings of Power? Who will win? But with all that being said, I am both excited and horrified for what we're going to get in this newest season of Rings of Power. Oh boy, buckle up and be ready for the fun. But in the meantime, as we wait for that to begin, and also for the finale of Murder Drones, huzzah, and a bunch of other great stuff coming down the pipeline, please check out our other videos here on our channel, especially if you haven't seen what we've done with the previous season for Rings of Power, breaking it down, analyzing it, and looking at specific writing lessons that we can learn from the successes and failures of this show. Then I think that would be really helpful for any novice author out there. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this incredible adventure that we call writing, and until the next video, y'all, tschüss.